The helicopter blades were still spinning when Sophia Reynolds stepped onto the cracked runway heels, clicking against old concrete, and burst out laughing. "You actually fly that rusty thing," she said, pointing straight at the old Bell helicopter parked in the hangar without even looking at the man standing beside it, hands black to the wrist with engine grease. She had flown 3 states to buy this airfield out from under whoever was running it into the ground. She had no idea she was laughing in the face of the man who owned every inch of it. Before we go any further, comment the name of your city below. I want to see how far this story travels today, state by state, mile by mile. And if stories about hard-working men who never quit on their families speak to you, hit subscribe now, because this one is going to earn it. Let's begin. Ryan Bennett had been awake since 4:30 that morning, same as every morning for the last 6 years, and by the time the sun cracked open over the tree line east of the runway, he already had grease past his wrists and a headlamp strapped over a Cardinals cap gone gray with age. Somewhere behind him in the trailer he'd grown up in, and now raised his own son in a bowl of cereal, was going soft on the counter, because Lucas wasn't up yet, and Ryan hadn't had the heart to wake him early. He didn't stop working when he heard the school morning quiet break open with the low-expensive drone of rotor blades somewhere past the tree line. Charter flights came and went out here. Private aircraft landed for fuel for weather for pilots who wanted to brag they'd touched down on a strip most GPS units barely acknowledged. None of it was his business until it was standing in front of him. This one landed different. Lower, slower, more careful than anyone flying into the sticks of rural airspace had any right to be, which told Ryan 2 things before the aircraft even kissed the tarmac. Whoever was flying it had money. And whoever was flying it had never set foot on a field like his before. He straightened up from beneath the old Bell 206. He'd been coaxing back to life for the better part of a year, wiped his hands on a rag that had stopped being white sometime during the Clinton administration, and watched a helicopter the size of a small house settle onto the far end of his strip like it was afraid of scuffing its own paint. A woman stepped out first. Gray suit sharp enough to cut heels sharper still, the kind of walk that had never once had to ask anyone for directions in her life. Behind her, a younger man in a blazer juggled a tablet, a leather folio, and a phone he was already talking into before his second foot hit the ground. Ryan didn't walk toward them. Out here, if people wanted something, they came and found you. That was how it had always worked going back to his father's day. They found him. The woman's eyes swept the hangar, the peeling paint, the stacked oil drums, the tarp thrown crooked over a Cessna, missing half its cowling, and something in her face closed like a door slamming. "Excuse me," she said, not quite looking at him, already scanning past his shoulder for someone who looked more official. "I'm here to see the owner, Sophia Reynolds. I have a 10 o'clock. "You're looking at 10 o'clock, Ryan said. "I mean the owner of the airfield." She repeated slower this time, the way you'd talk to someone you assumed hadn't understood you the first time. Ryan set the rag down on the workbench. "I heard you fine." That was when she noticed what was behind him. The helicopter mid-tear-down panels off engine block exposed one rotor blade leaning against the hangar wall like something wounded. She looked at it, then at him. Then she laughed short, sharp, disbelieving, the kind of sound that bounces off corrugated tin and doesn't apologize for itself. "You fly that rusty thing." Ryan didn't answer right away. He'd heard some version of that question more times in his life than he could count, from bankers, from insurance, men, from guys in pressed shirts who figured an old airframe and a cheap fuel truck meant an old cheap mind behind them. He'd learned a long time ago that the fastest way to lose to people like that was to try and win too early. "When she's back together, yeah," he said. "She's flown longer than you've probably been alive." "Sure she has." Sophia didn't bother hiding the amusement in her voice. She turned to her assistant without breaking stride. "Marcus, find whoever actually runs this place. We're burning daylight." Marcus didn't move right away. He was frowning down at his tablet, scrolling, comparing something on the screen to something standing in front of him that clearly didn't match. "Ms. Reynolds," he said carefully, "the field registration, it's not under a corporate LLC like the acquisitions team told us this morning. It's an individual owner." R. Bennett. Sophia's eyes cut back toward Ryan for half a second. Something flickered there, small, quick, gone before it could become a real thought. She waved it off the way people wave off anything inconvenient once they've already decided how their morning is supposed to go. Probably his boss, she said. Go find him. My board doesn't wait, and neither do I. Something tightened low in Ryan's chest. Not quite anger, more like the old familiar ache of being looked straight through by someone who'd already decided what he was worth before he opened his mouth. He thought about just letting it go. Thought about it for exactly as long as it took his son's face to surface in his mind. 7 years old, gap-toothed dead, asleep back in the trailer with a backpack already packed by the door. Because Lucas liked being ready early, liked routines, liked knowing his dad would be there when the bus came. He thought about how tired he was, how much simpler it would be to nod, say, sure, I'll go find him and let this woman keep whatever picture of the world made her comfortable and get back to the only thing that had never once judged him, the machines, the runway, the quiet. But something in her voice that clipped bored. Go find him scraped against something old in Ryan's scar tissue built up over years of being the man nobody looked at twice. So instead of walking away, he crossed his arms and said, "Why don't you tell me what you're here for? Might save everybody some time." Sophia exhaled through her nose, the exhale of a woman deeply unused to being questioned by anyone standing in coveralls. "I'm here to discuss an acquisition. Reynolds Aerospace is scouting this field for a regional logistics hub. We'd extend the runway, rebuild the hangars, replace most of..." She gestured vaguely at the whole rust-streaked, sun-bleached spread of the place at the bell behind him. It's a straightforward deal. Whoever owns this place is about to have a very good year." "Is that right?" "That's right. So if you'll just point me toward..." "Lucas isn't up for another 20 minutes. Ryan said, apropos of nothing, and Sophia blinked. "I'm sorry." "Nothing. Talking to myself." He picked the rag back up more to have something to do with his hands than because they needed it. "Keep going. A logistics hub." Sophia studied him for a second. Actually looked at him, the way you look at a stray dog trying to decide if it bites, and something about his stillness annoyed her more than his silence had. "Look," she said. "I don't have time to explain corporate real estate strategy to the maintenance staff. Just get me the owner. I'll make it worth his while to hurry." Worth his while. Ryan repeated it slow, testing the words the way he'd test a bolt he didn't trust. "You always talk to people like you're doing them a favor, just by showing up." Behind her, Marcus made a small strangled sound that might have been a laugh he swallowed at the last second. Sophia shot him a look that killed it dead. "I built a company from nothing?" she said, her voice flattening into something colder. "I don't owe anyone an explanation for how I talk, least of all a mechanic." There it was. The word landed exactly the way she meant it to. Ryan had been called worse by better people, and he didn't flinch, but something in him went very still and very quiet, the way it always did right before he made a decision he wasn't going to take back. "Fair enough," he said. "Owner's around somewhere. Give me a minute." He turned toward the office trailer, and for the length of that walk, his mind wasn't on Sophia Reynolds at all. It was on his father. Frank Bennett had built this airfield out of nothing, starting back when Ryan was younger than Lucas was. Now dragged surplus asphalt out of a decommissioned strip 2 counties over. Laid it himself with a rented roller and a borrowed flatbed, put up the first hangar out of a barn kit and pure stubbornness. Frank used to say, the field wasn't really a business. It was a promise to every farmer who needed a crop duster serviced before harvest. Every kid who wanted to know what a stall felt like before they ever sat behind a real yoke. Every retired pilot who just wanted somewhere quiet to keep something flying a little longer than it was supposed to. Ryan had been headed somewhere else once. A near full ride into an aerospace engineering program 2 states over. A standing offer from a defense contractor waiting on the other side of a degree he was 2 years into. The kind of career that put your name on patents instead of invoices. Then Sarah got sick. Then Sarah was gone faster than anyone had braced for, and Lucas was 18 months old and reaching for a mother who wasn't coming back. Frank's heart gave out 9 months after that, like it had just been waiting for permission. And somewhere in the wreckage of all of it, Ryan made a decision that nobody in his old life ever really understood. He came home. He picked up his father's tools. He raised his son on a runway instead of in a lab. And there had not been one single morning, not his hardest, not his lowest, not this one, where he regretted it. There had been offers since. A regional carrier had tried to poach him twice for a maintenance lead position that paid more in a month than the field cleared in half a year. A buddy from his old program had called 8 months ago about a slot in Huntsville, good enough money to put Lucas through any school in the country twice over. Ryan had turned both down without losing much sleep over it, because none of those jobs came with a 7-year-old asleep down the hall, or a father's handwriting still on half the toolboxes in the hangar, or a runway that had never once asked him to be anyone other than exactly who he was. He didn't owe Sophia Reynolds any of that history. She hadn't offered him hers. But he was done letting her decide in the first 60 seconds of meeting him what kind of man was standing in front of her. He grabbed the folder off the desk in the office trailer deed insurance binder. FAA registration. The entire paper trail of a life built out of grease and stubbornness, and carried it back out into the sun without opening it. Sophia was checking her watch when he returned. "Well, owner's tied up," Ryan said, "but I can answer whatever you need. Nobody alive knows this field better than I do." "I'm sure you do," she said in a tone that suggested she was sure of exactly the opposite. "But I need someone with actual authority to negotiate. Payroll, lease terms, and whether this—" She gestured at the bell again, mouth twisting like she'd caught a bad smell. "Circus gets cleared off my runway or not." "That helicopter," Ryan said, and for the first time there was an edge in his voice he didn't bother sanding down, "belonged to my father. He flew search and rescue in it for 11 years. Pulled 6 people off a ridge during the flood back in 2004 that the county chopper wouldn't touch because the ceiling was too low for anybody with sense to fly in it. He flew in anyway." Sophia's face didn't move much. Marcus at least had the decency to stop scrolling. "That's a nice story," Sophia said. "Sentiment doesn't extend a runway." "No," Ryan agreed. "It doesn't. But it built one." An old voice cut in before Sophia could answer. "Boss, you want me to top off the duster before the Hendersons come by, or you doing it yourself today?" Walt Simmons. 71 years old and the closest thing the field had to a second employee, ambled up from the fuel farm, wiping his hands on a rag identical to Ryan's, nodding a polite good morning at the strangers without breaking stride. "I'll get it. Walt, give me 20, Ryan said. Sophia's eyes narrowed slightly. "Boss, man's called me that since I was 16, Ryan said before Walt could answer for him. "Habit." Walt gave Sophia a look that suggested he had opinions about her tone that he was too polite or too old to bother saying out loud. "Ma'am," he said instead, touching 2 fingers to the brim of his cap. "You buying or selling?" "Neither yet." Sophia said a little sharper than she meant to. "Well, whichever it turns out to be." Walt said, "You're standing on the best run 1,200 feet of runway between here and the interstate. Man keeps better logs than the FAA does." He nodded once, satisfied with himself, and shuffled off toward the fuel farm without waiting on a reply. Sophia watched him go, filed the moment away, somewhere she didn't examine too closely, and turned back to the tour like it hadn't happened. "Walk me through the field," she said. "I want to see what we're actually working with before this goes to my board." It wasn't a request. Ryan knew an order dressed up as a question when he heard one, same as he knew a bolt about to strip before it stripped. He nodded anyway because whatever else was true this morning, he did want somebody, anybody to actually see this place. Not glance at it, see it. They walked the length of the strip together, Marcus trailing a half step behind with his tablet, and Ryan talked. Not the postcard version, the real one. How the North Hangar got added in '91, when Frank started servicing agricultural sprayers for 3 counties at once. How the fuel farm got rebuilt to code after 2 solid years of Ryan arguing with an insurance company that wanted to condemn the whole operation instead of fixing it. "They sent a man out of here in a rental car who'd never touched an aircraft in his life," Ryan said. And he told me the whole field was a liability nobody in their right mind would insure. I told him to give me 18 months. Took me 2 years and every dime I had saved, but I brought that fuel farm up to a standard his own company had to admit was better than half the municipal strips in the state. He nodded toward the rebuilt containment berm near the pumps. Haven't had a violation since. Not one. That's not maintenance, Sophia said almost to herself. That's an engineering project. Same thing out here, Ryan said. You just don't get a plaque for it. How every aircraft on the property had a maintenance log going back to the day it landed, because Frank Bennett used to say a machine without paperwork was a machine somebody was going to die in. Sophia listened with the particular half-attention people give something they've already decided doesn't matter until Ryan mentioned almost offhand the exact FAA inspection interval governing the crop duster near the tree line, chapter and verse. No hesitation, no notes. She stopped walking. How do you know that? Because I'm an A&P mechanic with an inspection authorization rating, Ryan said, and I was 2 years into an aerospace engineering degree before I came home. I know a few things. Something small and uncomfortable crossed her face. Not doubt yet, but the first hairline crack in the certainty she'd walked off that helicopter with. She covered it fast the way people do when they've built a career on never letting anyone see the crack. That's unusual for someone doing this kind of work. Funny how that word keeps meaning something different depending on who's saying it, Ryan said. Before she could respond, a school bus groaned to a stop at the end of the gravel drive, brakes hissing, and a small figure with a backpack twice his size came sprinting across the lot at a dead run. Yelling, "Dad, Dad, Ms. Ferris said I can bring Rex tomorrow for show and tell if you write the note. Can you write the note tonight, please, please?" Lucas skidded to a stop about 4 feet away, suddenly registering the strangers, and went shy the way 7-year-olds do, sliding half behind his father's leg, while still openly studying Sophia with the unfiltered curiosity only kids get away with. "This your boy?" Sophia asked, and for just a second, her voice lost its edge entirely, not warm exactly, but caught off guard human. "This is Lucas," Ryan said, and something shifted in his own voice too, something that had nothing to do with Sophia Reynolds at all. He crouched to meet his son at eye level. "I'll write the note tonight, bud. Go grab your snack, I'll be in soon." Lucas nodded, gave Sophia one more long assessing look like he was quietly deciding something about her that he wasn't going to share, then took off toward the trailer. Sophia watched him go. "You're raising him out here, alone." "I'm raising him right," Ryan said. "There's a difference between alone and lonely. I'm not either one." She didn't have an answer for that. For the first time since stepping off the helicopter, Sophia Reynolds looked like a woman standing on ground that wasn't quite as solid as she'd assumed it was. Marcus's phone buzzed, then sharp and insistent. He glanced at the screen, went a shade paler, and stepped a few feet away, voice dropping low, but not quite low enough. "No, tell Sullivan we haven't confirmed ownership yet. I know he wants an answer today. I know, just give me an hour." Sophia's head turned a fraction of an inch toward him, and whatever she'd heard, she filed it away without comment, sharpening back up like a blade being wiped clean. "I need to speak to the owner today," she said, some of her earlier edge sliding back into place like she was trying to reset the morning to where it had started. "Whatever this delay is, I don't have patience left for it. My firm doesn't make offers twice." Ryan looked at her for a long moment. Behind her, Marcus had gone quiet. Phone lowered, staring at his boss with the expression of a man who'd just learned something he badly wanted to warn her about and hadn't found the nerve. "You want the owner?" Ryan said. "That's what I said. You've been talking to him for the last 40 minutes. The words landed the way a wrench drops on concrete flat, sudden, impossible to take back. Sophia's mouth opened, and nothing came out right away. She looked at Marcus. Marcus, still holding his phone, gave a single helpless nod, confirming the exact thing Ryan had just told her. "Ryan Bennett," Ryan said plainly, without performance, without a trace of the satisfaction he might have let himself feel an hour earlier. "I own the field. I own the hangars. I own the helicopter you called Rusty, and the crop duster you never asked about, and every acre of dirt you're standing on right now. My father's name was on the original deed. Mine's on the one that matters today. Sophia Reynolds, who had stepped off that helicopter, certain of exactly what kind of morning she was having, stood very still in the middle of it, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, had absolutely nothing to say. Marcus cleared his throat tablet, forgotten at his side. Ms. Reynolds, I tried to flag it when the registry pulled up an individual name instead of an LLC. Not now, Marcus. Her voice came out quieter than she meant it to, none of the crispness from 20 minutes ago left in it. She looked at Ryan, really looked the way she should have the moment she stepped off the runway and ran back through everything she'd said since landing. Mechanic, maintenance staff, worth his while. Every word came back to her in her own voice, and none of them sounded the way they had when she'd first said them. I owe you an apology, she said. You owe me a lot of things, Ryan said. An apology's a start. He didn't say it unkindly. He didn't say it with any heat left in it at all. The anger he might have felt an hour ago had already burned down to something quieter, something closer to tired. Behind him, past the open hangar door, he could hear Lucas laughing at something on the television, oblivious to the fact that the woman standing on his family's runway had just found out exactly whose legacy she'd been laughing at. Lucas's laughter drifted out from the trailer, bright and unaware, and for a second, neither adult standing on the runway said anything at all. Sophia's mouth was still half open around the apology she'd just given, like she hadn't expected to mean it as much as she suddenly did. Marcus shifted his weight phone still loose in his hand and made the mistake of speaking before anyone asked him to. I can call Sullivan back and tell him the ownership situation's changed, he said. That should buy us way. Sullivan. Ryan's voice cut through the morning air flat and hard, all the tiredness gone out of it in an instant. Say that name again. Marcus froze. Sophia turned on him with a look that could have stripped paint. Marcus, I didn't think it mattered yet, Marcus said, backing up half a step. Grant Sullivan reached out to the firm 3 weeks ago, said he had an interest in this parcel too. We assumed it was just noise developers sniff around every rural strip within 100 miles of the interstate expansion. Grant Sullivan has been standing in that exact spot, Ryan said, pointing at the gravel where Marcus was standing, twice in the last month, once in April, once 9 days ago. Sophia's expression shifted, sharpened the CEO in her waking back up even through the fog of her own humiliation. You know him. I know what he wants. Ryan's jaw tightened. He wants this field the way a man wants a splinter out of his shoe. Doesn't care how. First time he came out here, he offered me $800,000 for 40 acres that aren't worth half that to anybody but him. Second time, he didn't offer anything. He just told me the county was reviewing the access road easement, and wouldn't it be a shame if Bennett Field lost its only paved route in and out? That's a threat, Sophia said. That's Tuesday, Ryan said. Sophia looked at Marcus. Why wasn't this in the briefing? Because legal flagged it as unconfirmed, Marcus said, already reaching for his tablet like it might save him. Sullivan doesn't leave paper trails. Everything's verbal. Everything's off the record. He's Ms. Reynolds. He's good at this. He's done it to at least 2 other properties on the eastern corridor that I know of. Both times the owners sold within 6 months. Ryan felt something cold settle in his stomach, the kind of cold that didn't come from surprise so much as confirmation. He'd suspected as much. Suspected the man in the tailored jacket who'd shaken his hand too hard and smiled too wide wasn't acting alone, wasn't just some local operator with more ambition than sense. Hearing it laid out plain from the mouth of a stranger's assistant still landed like a gut punch. You're telling me, Ryan said slowly, that the same week I've got a woman laughing at my father's helicopter, I've also got a man circling my property like a buzzard, and neither one of you thought that was worth mentioning to each other before you got in a helicopter and flew out here. I didn't know he'd already approached you, Sophia said. Not until 30 seconds ago. Well, now you do. For a moment, the 3 of them just stood there, the morning's temperature having changed in every sense that mattered. Somewhere behind them, Walt's fuel cart rattled to a stop near the crop duster, oblivious, and the ordinary sound of it felt strange against how fast the ground had shifted under everyone's feet. Then the trailer door banged open. Lucas came out at a run again, but this time there was no backpack, no excitement about a note for show and tell. His face had gone pale and pinched in a way that made Ryan's whole body go on alert before the boy even said a word. "Dad?" Lucas's voice cracked. "Are we losing the field?" The question landed in the middle of the group like a dropped wrench. Ryan crouched fast, closing the distance to his son, in 2 steps, hands going to Lucas's shoulders. Hey, look at me, where'd you hear that?" The TV was off. I came out to ask if I could watch the tablet instead. And I heard him. Lucas pointed trembling finger aimed at Marcus. "Say something about a man wanting our field, and you said something about losing the road, and I thought—" His breath hitched. "Grandpa's helicopter. If we lose the field, does that mean we lose Grandpa's helicopter too?" Ryan's chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with Sophia Reynolds or Grant Sullivan or any of it. He pulled Lucas in one hand, cupping the back of his son's head. "Nobody is losing anything," Ryan said, low and certain, the voice he used when he needed Lucas to believe him more than he needed anything else in the world. "Not the field, not the helicopter, not this trailer. You hear me? I promise you that." "You promise." "I promise." It was the kind of promise a man makes before he knows for certain he can keep it, and Ryan felt the weight of that the second the words left his mouth. But Lucas nodded, some of the color coming back into his face, and pressed his forehead briefly against his father's shoulder, before pulling back embarrassed, now that the fear had passed, aware that strangers were watching. "Can I go finish my show?" Lucas mumbled. "Go on." The boy disappeared back inside, and the second the door clicked shut, Ryan turned back around, and whatever restraint he'd been holding on to for Sophia's benefit was gone. "You see that—" His voice was quiet, which somehow made it worse than shouting would have. "That's my son, 7 years old, scared he's about to lose the one thing that still connects him to a grandfather he never got to meet. So before either one of you says another word about acquisitions or logistics hubs, or whatever this is, you're going to understand something. This isn't a real estate transaction to me. This is his whole life." Sophia didn't say anything for a moment. When she did, her voice had lost every trace of the boredom it started the morning with. "I understand that more than you think," she said. "Give me the paperwork." "Excuse me." "The folder. Deed, insurance, whatever you were carrying around 10 minutes ago like a shield. I want to see it. All of it. Right now." Ryan hesitated, some old instinct telling him not to hand a stranger the one physical record of his entire life's work, especially a stranger who'd walked in mocking him an hour ago. But something in her face had changed, too sharper, now focused the expression of someone who'd just found a fight worth having. He went and got the folder. They spread it out on the hood of the fuel truck, the closest flat surface around, and Sophia went through it with the kind of speed that told Ryan she hadn't gotten where she was by being slow at anything. Deed. Insurance binder. FAA registration. Property tax records going back decades. She flipped through pages, fast scanning until about 4 minutes in, her hand stopped. "What's this?" She turned the page toward him. An old document yellowed at the edges, a filing from a county records office Ryan hadn't looked at in years because it predated him. A lien. Filed against the property. Dated 11 years before Ryan was even born. "That's nothing," Ryan said, though his voice wavered slightly on the word, nothing. "That's ancient. My grandfather took out an equipment loan back in the 70s before my dad even had the deed transferred to him. It would have been paid off decades ago." "Would have been," Sophia said. Or was? Ryan reached for the page, read it himself for the first time in longer than he could remember, and felt the ground tilt a second time that morning. There was no release stamped on the filing, no satisfaction of lien, no record of it ever being cleared. "That can't be right," he said. "This place has changed hands twice on paper since then. Nobody flagged this at either transfer. Rural county records don't always talk to each other," Marcus said quietly, already typing. especially not 40, 50 years back. If nobody searched title properly when your father inherited it or when it passed to you, are you telling me, Ryan said, and his voice had gone very quiet again, that somebody out there could have a legal claim on my land that my own family didn't know existed? Nobody answered right away, and the silence answered for them. Sophia was already pulling out her own phone, scrolling, typing something with the focus of a woman who had just found the one problem in the world she actually knew how to solve. Marcus, get legal on this the second we're back near Signal. I want to know who originally held that lien, whether it was ever assigned or sold, and whether it's still enforceable. On it. Ryan stood there staring at the paper like it might rearrange itself into something less frightening if he looked hard enough. 11 minutes ago, he'd been the man standing on solid ground for the first time all morning, the man who'd finally gotten to say I own this, and now the floor had cracked open beneath the words before they'd even finished echoing. Why would you help me with this? Ryan said, finally looking at Sophia, suspicion still thick in his voice, even as something else moved underneath it. An hour ago, you wanted to bulldoze half this place. Now you're pulling legal in on a Saturday to protect it. Sophia lowered her phone. For a second, the practiced polish slipped off her face entirely, and what was underneath looked tired in a way Ryan recognized because he saw it in the mirror most mornings. Because I know what it looks like when someone circles a piece of land they have no right to, she said. I've watched it happen before. Watched a man lose everything his family built because somebody with more lawyers and less conscience decided he was in the way. Who? Doesn't matter right now. She said it fast, closing the door on the subject before it had really opened, and Ryan filed the flash of pain in her voice away, the same way he'd filed Walt's comment earlier, not understood yet, but not forgotten either. What matters is if Grant Sullivan already knows about this lien, and I'd bet my firm's entire quarter that he does, then he's not circling. He's already got a hand on the wheel. He's just waiting for the right moment to turn it. The words hadn't finished settling when Marcus's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, and every ounce of color drained out of his face for the second time that morning. It's him, he said. It's Sullivan. He's calling me. Put it on speaker, Ryan said before Sophia could. Marcus's hand shook slightly as he answered, thumbed the speaker icon, and set the phone down on the hood of the truck, between the three of them like it was something that might go off. Marcus! Grant Sullivan's voice came through smooth, unhurried a voice that had clearly never once had to raise itself to get what it wanted. Tell me you've got good news about the Bennett parcel. Ryan leaned toward the phone before anyone could stop him. You can tell me yourself, Grant. A pause on the other end. Not a long one. Just long enough to confirm he hadn't expected to hear that voice. Ryan. Sullivan's tone didn't crack. Didn't even really shift, which somehow unsettled Ryan more than if it had. Didn't realize you'd be part of this call. Small world. Small county, Ryan said. You've been in it a lot lately. Just doing my due diligence. Same as anyone. A soft, unhurried laugh followed the kind meant to sound relaxed and land as a warning instead. I hear congratulations might be in order. Word is you've got some new friends interested in your little airfield. Big company, big money. Must feel nice after all these years scraping by on fuel sales and crop duster tune-ups to finally have somebody take you seriously. Say what you called to say. Fine. The warmth drained out of Sullivan's voice in an instant, replaced by something flatter, colder, the voice of a man who'd stopped pretending the moment it stopped being useful. There's a lien on that property, Ryan. Filed decades before you were old enough to know what the word meant. I'd hate for your new friends to find out about it after they've already wired you money for a piece of land that might not be fully yours to sell. Ryan's stomach dropped straight through the tarmac. He looked at Sophia. Sophia looked at the phone, jaw tight, saying nothing, yet letting Sullivan keep talking, keep hanging himself with his own certainty. You knew, Ryan said. You've known this whole time. I know a lot of things about a lot of properties, Sullivan said. Comes with the job. Here's what I know about this one. That lien was never satisfied. Never assigned to a public record either because I bought it. Quietly. 8 months ago. Which means, legally speaking, whatever deal you're cooking up out there with your new friends, it runs through me now, whether anybody likes it or not. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Ryan had ever heard on that runway. "You're bluffing," Ryan said, though there was less certainty in it than he wanted there to be. "Check the filing yourself once your friend's lawyer gets around to it," Sullivan said. "I'll wait. In the meantime, my offer's still on the table. 800,000 cash, quiet close, and this whole lien conversation disappears the same day the wire clears. Or we can do this the hard way with lawyers and headlines, and however many months it takes to sort out title on a property that's about to be tangled up in litigation. Nobody in your position can afford to survive. Your call, Ryan. It always has been. You just haven't wanted to admit it." The line went dead before anyone could answer him. Nobody moved for a long moment. Even Marcus, who Ryan had pegged an hour ago as the type to fill silence out of nervous habit, didn't say a word. Then Sophia picked the phone up off the hood, handed it back to Marcus without looking at him, and said in a voice gone hard as the tarmac under their feet, "Get me everything on Grant Sullivan. Every deal he's closed in the last 5 years. Every property he's circled that ended up selling under market value within 6 months. I want a pattern, and I want it before this afternoon." "Ms. Reynolds, that's outside the scope of—" "I said before this afternoon." Marcus didn't argue again. He walked off toward the helicopter already dialing, and for the first time since she'd stepped off that aircraft laughing at a broken-down helicopter, Sophia Reynolds looked like a woman who had completely forgotten why she'd come. Ryan stood there, folder still in his hands, watching a woman he'd trusted less than an hour ago suddenly become the only person standing between his son's home and a man who'd just threatened it over speakerphone, like it was nothing. "Why do you hate him this much?" Ryan said. "You didn't even blink when he said the number. 800,000. That's real money to a man like Sullivan to throw around like bait. But you're not thinking about the deal anymore. You're thinking about something else." Sophia was quiet for a moment, staring off toward the horizon, where the tree line broke against a sky that had gone the pale, washed-out blue of a morning that had already lasted 3 lifetimes. When she finally spoke, her voice had none of the polish left in it at all. "6 years ago," she said, "a man very much like Grant Sullivan did to my father exactly what he's trying to do to you. Different state, different property, same playbook. Buy up quiet paper. Nobody's looked at in decades, dangle it over somebody's head until they're too tired and too scared to fight and call it business." She looked at Ryan then, and there was something raw underneath the composure. Something that had nothing to do with logistics hubs or acquisitions. "My father lost everything he built in 4 months. I was 31 years old running my first company, and I didn't understand what was happening until it was already over. I have spent every year since telling myself I'd never stand by and watch it happen to someone else again. And now you are." "Now I'm not," Sophia said, and for the first time that morning there wasn't a trace of doubt in her voice. "Whatever you think of me, Ryan Bennett, whatever I said to you an hour ago, I am not walking off this runway and letting Grant Sullivan take one blade of grass off your son's home. Not while I'm still breathing and still have a law firm on retainer." Ryan searched her face for the catch. The angle, the part of this that was still about the deal. Still about the logistics hub and the board meeting and the quarterly numbers. He didn't find it. What he found instead was something that looked uncomfortably close to the same thing that had kept him up nights for 6 years straight. The thing that made a man dig his heels into ground other people had already written off. "Okay," Ryan said slowly. "Okay. But I want to be clear about something. This doesn't mean I trust you. An hour ago you called my father's helicopter a rusty thing and called me the maintenance staff. That doesn't just wash off because you're mad at somebody who reminds you of your own history." "I'm not asking you to trust me," Sophia said. "I'm asking you to let me help you keep something Sullivan has no right to take. Those are 2 different things." Behind them, near the hangar door, Lucas had wandered back out, tablet forgotten, watching the 2 adults with the same careful, searching look he'd given Sophia the first time he saw her. He didn't come closer this time. He just stood there, small against the wide-open sky, waiting to see what his father was going to decide the way kids do when they know without being told that the next few minutes are going to matter more than most. Ryan looked back at Sophia, then at the folder in his hands, then at his son, standing in the hangar's shadow, and felt the full weight of everything that had happened in less than 2 hours settle onto his shoulders at once. The lien, the threat, the promise he'd made to Lucas, that he wasn't entirely sure yet he could keep. "Fine," he said finally. "You help me keep this land clean of Sullivan's hands, but the second I think you're using this to get a better price out of me, we're done. Understood?" "Understood." Marcus jogged back over phone, still pressed to his ear, breathless. "Ms. Reynolds, you need to hear this." Sophia turned. "What?" "The lien filing," Marcus said. "I pulled the assignment records while I was on with legal. Sullivan didn't just buy it 8 months ago like he said." He looked up, and whatever he'd found had clearly shaken him. The company that originally held it back in the 70s, the one that never filed the release, it wasn't some random equipment lender, it was a holding company. And according to the county archive, that holding company was founded by Grant Sullivan's grandfather. Ryan felt the air go out of the morning entirely. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "that this isn't some old paperwork mistake somebody happened to stumble onto?" "I'm telling you," Marcus said, "that as far as I can tell right now, this family's been sitting on a claim to your land for 50 years. Waiting." Nobody said anything for a long moment. Out past the runway, the wind picked up, rattling the loose sheet metal on the north hangar, the way it always did before a front moved through, and Ryan Bennett stood in the middle of everything he'd built. Everything his father had built before him, and understood for the first time that the man who'd shaken his hand too hard in April hadn't been circling by accident at all. He'd been waiting his whole life for exactly this morning. Claude's response was interrupted. Tra loi trung tin yun cho tao. Deliberated direct response composition without tool assistance. Deliberated direct response composition without tool assistance. He'd been waiting his whole life for exactly this morning. Ryan said it out loud without meaning to, and the words tasted strange in his mouth, like something he'd known for years without ever letting himself think it. 50 years. 2 generations of Sullivans circling this exact patch of dirt patient as buzzards, while 3 generations of Bennetts poured their whole lives into it, without knowing a claim was sitting quiet in a filing cabinet somewhere just waiting for the right morning to wake up. "That's not possible," he said. But even as the words left him, he could hear how thin they sounded. "My father would have known. He would have told me." "Maybe he didn't know either," Sophia said. 50-year-old paperwork in a county archive nobody digitized until 3 years ago. If nobody went looking for it, there was no reason for anybody to find it, until somebody did. Until Sullivan did. Until Sullivan's grandfather filed it, Marcus said, still scrolling, still pale. And then just sat on it, for half a century, waiting for the land to be worth enough to matter. Ryan pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes for a second, like he could push the whole morning back out through his skull if he tried hard enough. When he lowered it, his voice had gone rough. "Call Denny Okafor," he said to no one in particular, then caught himself and looked at Sophia. "Family attorney. Handled my dad's estate when he passed. If anybody in 3 counties knows the real history on this land, it's him. Man's been practicing since before I was born." "Do it," Sophia said to Marcus, who was already dialing before she finished the sentence. It took 4 rings. Ryan stood with his arms crossed, jaw tight, watching Marcus's face for any flicker of good news and finding none. Then the call connected, and Marcus put it on speaker without being asked this time. "Bennett Field, this better be an emergency," came a gravel-voiced greeting warm underneath the gruffness. "I'm elbow-deep in a will dispute that's uglier than a Tuesday morning. Denny, it's Ryan. Ryan Bennett in the flesh, or at least in the phone line. What's wrong?" "Grant Sullivan," Ryan said, and heard the old man on the other end go quiet in a way that told him everything before another word got said. "Ah, hell," Denny said. "He finally did it." Ryan's stomach dropped clean through the tarmac a second time that morning. "You knew about this. I knew there was old paper on that property nobody'd ever cleared," Denny said, and his voice had lost its warmth, Now gone careful, the voice of a man picking his way through a minefield he'd walked before. Your granddad had a falling out with Sullivan's granddad back in '71. Business deal gone sideways. Some equipment loan Sullivan's family financed that your granddad swore up and down he paid off in cash. No paperwork, the way men did things back then on a handshake. Sullivan's granddad never filed the release. Your granddad never chased him on it because he figured it was dead and buried. I told your daddy about it once years ago, told him to get a title search done just to be safe. He said, Denny paused. He said he didn't have the money to spend on a problem that might not exist. So he knew, Ryan said, voice flat. He suspected. There's a difference, son, and I'm sorry I never pushed him harder on it. I should have. Ryan turned away from the phone for a second, staring out across the runway toward the tree line, jaw working. Fighting something down that felt too much like grief, layered on top of anger, layered on top of exhaustion. His father dead, 6 years, had carried this quiet worry around for who knew how long and never once mentioned it. Probably the same way Ryan had spent this whole conversation, not mentioning to Lucas exactly how bad his own bank account was most months. Some things men in his family just didn't say out loud. And Ryan was starting to understand, standing on that tarmac, exactly how expensive that habit could get. Denny, Sophia said, leaning toward the phone. This is Sophia Reynolds. Reynolds Aerospace. I've got legal on standby. Is there any statute of limitations that could apply here? Any argument that the lien's unenforceable after this many decades of inaction? A pause. Papers rustling somewhere on the other end. Depends on the state. Depends on the specific lien type. Depends on whether Sullivan's holding company took any action to preserve it over the years, renewed the filing, sent notice, anything, Denny said. If they let it go completely dormant with zero activity, there's an argument. A real one. But if Sullivan's grandfather or father ever so much as sent a certified letter reasserting the claim sometime in the last 5 decades, that argument gets a lot weaker. Find out, Sophia said. Today if you can. Ma'am, with respect, I don't know you from Adam, and I don't take orders from big city phone numbers I've never met. Denny, Ryan said, cutting in before Sophia could answer. She's on our side. Long story. Just trust me on this one, please. Another pause, longer this time, like the old man was weighing 40 years of instinct against the plain desperation in Ryan's voice. Fine, Denny said finally. Give me until end of day. I'll pull everything the county's got and call you the second I know something. The line clicked dead. Ryan let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding since the helicopter first touched down. 2 hours. It had been 2 hours since this woman laughed at his father's helicopter, and in that time, his entire understanding of his own life had come apart at the seams and started stitching itself back together into something he didn't recognize yet. You okay? Sophia asked, and the question caught him off guard because there was nothing performative in it. No angle. Just a plain question from someone who'd apparently asked herself the same thing more than once in her life. No, Ryan said honestly, but I will be. Lucas had drifted closer again during the phone call, close enough to catch the tail end of it, and Ryan saw the worry creeping back into his son's face and crouched down before it could take root. Hey, remember what I told you? Ryan kept his voice steady, even though steady was the last thing he felt. I promised you we're not losing this place. That promise doesn't change just because grown-ups are having a complicated conversation. You go on and finish your show. I've got this handled. You sure? I'm sure. He wasn't not entirely not yet, but a father learned early that some lies were kindnesses, and this one he intended to make true no matter what it cost him. Lucas managed a small nod and wandered off, dragging his feet less than he had the first time, and Ryan watched him go before turning back to the two people still standing in what used to be a quiet corner of his morning. I need to walk, he said. Clear my head. You two do whatever you need to do. He didn't wait for permission. He crossed the tarmac toward the fuel farm, hands shoved in his pockets, and found Walt there checking hose fittings with the unhurried patience of a man who'd outlived 3 decades of other people's emergencies. You look like a man who just found out the ground under him ain't as solid as he thought, Walt said without looking up. Something like that. Sullivan. Ryan blinked. How'd you know? Walt straightened, wiped his hands, looked at him steady. Because that man's been sniffing around this county since before you had gray in your beard, son. I watched him try the same trick on the Henderson spread 2 years back. Old lean Sudden lawyers real polite about the whole thing right up until it wasn't. He spat to the side, disgusted. Henderson's folded in 10 weeks, sold for a third of what the land was worth, just to make the headache stop. They're gone. Moved to Tennessee, nice enough from what I hear, but that farm's under a warehouse complex now, and old Henderson, last I talked to him, still can't drive past a shipping truck without going quiet for a minute. Walt looked at Ryan hard. You're not him, though. You know that you've got more fight in you than that man ever did, and you've got something he didn't. What's that? People willing to stand next to you, Walt said, and nodded past Ryan's shoulder toward where Sophia was still on her phone, pacing, voice low and urgent, clearly fighting somebody in her own company over resources she wanted, committed to a fight that wasn't hers to have. That woman laughed at your daddy's helicopter 2 hours ago, and now she's burning her Saturday tearing apart property records for you. People don't do that for a real estate deal, Ryan. They do that because something in them recognized something in you worth fighting for. Ryan didn't have an answer for that. He just stood there a moment, letting the words settle, letting some of the tightness in his shoulders ease back half an inch, and then a new sound cut through the morning tires on gravel. Fast aggressive, the crunch of a vehicle that wasn't easing off the throttle the way visitors usually did on his drive. A black pickup jacked up higher than it needed to be. Engine, louder than it needed to be, came tearing up the access road and skidded to a stop close enough to the hangar that dust kicked up over the nose of the Cessna. The driver's door opened before the truck had even finished settling. Grant Sullivan stepped out in jeans and a quarter zip that cost more than Ryan's whole outfit combined. Sunglasses pushed up into hair that had never once been mussed by actual work, and a smile on his face that didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. "Ryan Bennett?" he called out like they were old friends meeting up for coffee. "Heard you had company. Figured I'd come see for myself." Sophia's head snapped up from her phone. Marcus went rigid. Even Walt, who Ryan had never once seen flinch at anything in 15 years of knowing him, set the fuel hose down slow and careful, the way a man sets something down when he wants both hands free. "You weren't invited," Ryan said, walking toward him, putting himself between Sullivan and the trailer where his son was still inside, still believing the promise his father had just made him. "Didn't think I needed one," Sullivan said. "Public road right up to your gate. Nothing illegal about a friendly visit." His eyes drifted past Ryan to Sophia, and something calculating moved behind them. "Ms. Reynolds. Didn't expect Reynolds Aerospace to still be parked out here after the conversation Marcus and I had this morning." "Conversations change," Sophia said, voice ice cold, walking forward to stand shoulder to shoulder with Ryan without a second's hesitation. "Especially once I hear a man threatening a family's home over speakerphone like it's a negotiating tactic." "Threatening," Sullivan pressed a hand to his chest, mock wounded. "I was informing. There's a difference, sweetheart." "Don't," Sophia said. And something in the single word carried enough weight that Sullivan's smile flickered just barely before he smoothed it back into place. "Fine. Business, then." He turned his attention fully to Ryan. "I heard you're calling up old Denny Okafor, trying to find a loophole in a lien my family's held clean title to since Nixon was in office. I'll save you the legal fees, Ryan. There isn't one. My grandfather renewed that filing 3 times over the decades, most recently, in 2009, right around the time your daddy was fighting that insurance company over the fuel farm. Man had enough on his plate. Never even noticed the notice sitting in his mailbox." Ryan felt something in his chest go cold, and still, the specific stillness of a man realizing the ground he'd just started to believe in again might not hold after all. "You're lying," he said, but it came out less certain than he wanted. "Check the county archive yourself," Sullivan said easily. "Recorded, stamped public record. I'm not in the business of bluffing when the truth works just fine." He glanced toward the hangar, toward the trailer, toward the shape of a small boy's shadow moving behind a curtain that had gone still the second the truck pulled in. "Cute kid, by the way." Heard he's scared of losing this place. Smart boy. He should be. Something in Ryan snapped loose that had been holding steady for 6 years. He closed the distance between them in 3 fast strides, close enough that Sullivan's easy smile finally faltered close enough that Walt started forward with a low warning, "Ryan," that Ryan didn't listen to. "You leave my son out of your mouth," Ryan said, low and shaking with a fury that had nowhere else to go. "You want to threaten me? Threaten me. Man to man, all day, every day, I don't care. But you say his name again, you look at that trailer again, like it's a bargaining chip, and I promise you paperwork or not, you're going to have a problem that no lawyer on either side can fix." For one long second, nobody moved. Sophia's hand had come up hovering near Ryan's arm, without quite touching it, ready to pull him back if it came to that. Marcus had gone completely still, phone forgotten. Even the wind seemed to hold off. Then Sullivan laughed, short, forced a man trying to reclaim ground he'd just watched slip out from under him. "Relax," he said, stepping back. Hands up, though his eyes hadn't lost their edge. "No need for theatrics. I'm a businessman, not a monster. I'm giving you a courtesy nobody gave the Hendersons. Ryan, a real conversation face to face before the lawyers turned this into something ugly for everybody. 800,000, same offer as April. Sign by Friday, and this lien disappears, the sale closes quiet, and your boy never has to know how close this came to going a different way. And if I don't, then Monday morning my attorneys file to enforce the lien in district court, which means your title gets clouded, which means Reynolds Aerospace here." He nodded at Sophia without looking at her. "Walks away from any deal with you so fast, you'll feel the breeze because no board in America signs off on acquiring contested property. And somewhere in the 18 months it takes to sort out the lawsuit, you'll have burned through whatever savings you've got just keeping the lights on out here, and you'll sell to me anyway. Just for less. Much less. Everybody ends up in the same place, Ryan. I'm just offering you the version where it doesn't take 2 years and every dollar you've got to get there." Ryan stood there breathing hard, staring at a man who'd clearly done this exact calculation a dozen times before on a dozen other families, and felt the full sickening weight of how thoroughly outmatched he was in a fight he'd never asked to be in. Then Sophia stepped forward. "Grant Sullivan," she said, and something in the way she said his full name made the man's easy composure crack half a degree. "Marcus pulled your history this morning. 5 properties in 3 years. Every one of them a quiet lien, a friendly visit, a Friday deadline. Every one of them a family that folded because they didn't have a Reynolds Aerospace legal team on retainer. And now you do," Sullivan said, unbothered, or doing a very good job pretending to be. "Congratulations to Mr. Bennett on his sudden good fortune. Here's what you don't know," Sophia said, taking one more step forward, close enough now that Sullivan had to actually look up slightly to meet her eyes. 6 years ago, a man used the exact same playbook on my father. Different state, different lien, same friendly visit then Friday deadline routine. I was too young and too green to stop it, and I have spent every year since building a company with enough money and enough lawyers that nobody would ever be able to do it to anyone I cared about again." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You picked the wrong family's Saturday to show up uninvited, Mr. Sullivan. Because I am not walking away from this property, and I am not letting a single filing from 2009 stand between Ryan Bennett and his son's home. Monday morning, when your attorneys file to enforce that lien, mine will already be in front of a judge arguing Lachey's unclean hands and every dormant claim doctrine this state has ever recognized. And every property you've quietly squeezed out of a scared family for the last 3 years is about to become extremely interesting to a very good investigative reporter I happen to know personally. I'll cheer. Don't see us." The color in Sullivan's face shifted just slightly, the first real crack in the performance since he'd stepped out of the truck. "That sounds like a threat," he said. "It's an informing," Sophia said, echoing his own word back at him with a coldness that made even Marcus take half a step back. "There's a difference, sweetheart." For a long moment, nobody spoke. Somewhere behind them, a hangar door creaked in the wind. Somewhere inside the trailer, a small boy who had no idea his father's whole life was being decided 40 feet from his window kept watching cartoons, still believing a promise that hung right at that moment by the thinnest thread it had hung on all morning. Sullivan looked between the two of them. Ryan, jaw-set fists still loosely clenched at his sides. Sophia unmoved, unblinking every inch, the woman who'd built an empire out of not backing down. And something calculating moved behind his eyes one more time, recalculating odds that had apparently just shifted more than he was prepared for. "Friday," he said finally, voice tight. "The offer's good until Friday. After that it's gone, and so is any version of this that doesn't end in a courtroom." He turned back toward his truck, then paused, looked back over his shoulder at Ryan with something that might have been the last honest thing he said all morning. "For what it's worth, I always liked your old man. Frank ran a clean field. Doesn't mean business is personal. It's my son's home," Ryan said. "It's about as personal as it gets." Sullivan didn't answer that. He climbed back into his truck, gunned the engine harder than it needed, and tore back down the gravel drive, the same way he'd come, dust hanging in the air behind him, long after the sound of the engine had faded into the tree line. Nobody moved for a moment. Then Ryan let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in his chest since the truck first appeared, and turned to find Sophia already watching him, some of the ice gone out of her expression now that the threat had driven away. "You didn't have to say all that," Ryan said. "About your father." "I know." "Why'd you do it?" Sophia looked past him toward the trailer, toward the small shifting shadow still visible behind the curtain. "Because some promises are worth more when somebody else helps you keep them," she said. "You told your son you weren't losing this place. I'd like to help make sure that's true." Ryan studied her for a long moment. The woman who'd laughed at his father's helicopter less than 3 hours ago, now standing on his runway, having just gone toe-to-toe with the man trying to take it, and felt something shift in his chest that he didn't have a name for yet, something that wasn't quite trust but had stopped being suspicion too. "Friday," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. 4 days. 4 days, Sophia agreed. "We're going to need every hour of them." Behind them, Walt had gone back to the fuel hose, hands steady now, though his eyes kept drifting toward the empty gravel drive where Sullivan's dust was still settling, like a man who'd seen enough storms roll through to know this one wasn't finished yet, not by a long shot. Not by a long shot. The words hung in the air behind Sullivan's dust trail, and Ryan felt them settle into his chest like a stone dropped into a well too deep to hear it land. 4 days. He'd spent the better part of the morning discovering his whole life could be rewritten by a piece of paper older than he was, and now he had 96 hours to stop it. Sophia was already moving phone back at her ear, voice clipped and fast, in a way that told Ryan she'd stopped thinking about this as a favor sometime in the last 10 minutes and started thinking about it as a war she intended to win. "I don't care whose Saturday I'm ruining," she was saying. "Pull the litigation team off the Denver filing. I'll deal with that Monday. I need eyes on a county lien from 1971 by tonight." A pause. "Yes, tonight." Marcus hovered nearby tablet, already back out, thumbs moving fast. "I've got a call into a record specialist we've used before. If there's a flaw in that 2009 renewal, she'll find it faster than any of us will." "What kind of flaw?" Ryan asked. "Renewals have to follow exact procedure." Marcus said, not looking up. "Right form, right office, right signature, filed within the correct window before the previous filing expires. Miss any one of those and the whole renewal's invalid, which means the lien reverts to dormant, which means Sophia's lache's argument gets a lot stronger," Ryan finished. Exactly. It was the first genuinely good sentence Ryan had heard all day, and he let himself hold on to it for exactly as long as it took Denny Okafor to call back 40 minutes later, voice tight in a way Ryan didn't like at all. "I pulled the 2009 filing." Denny said no greeting, straight into it. "It's there. Stamped, dated, signed by a notary named Carol Higgins. Everything looks clean on the surface." "On the surface," Sophia repeated, catching the phrasing immediately. "On the surface," Denny agreed. But I've been doing this 31 years, and something about the signature's bothering me. Carol Higgins retired from that notary office in 2006, 3 years before this filing. I need somebody to confirm that before I say it out loud, as anything more than an old man's hunch. But if I'm right, that renewal was signed by a woman who wasn't authorized to sign anything by the time her name went on it. The porch light of hope Ryan had been holding on to for 40 minutes flared up bright enough to hurt. "You're saying it's fake," he said. "I'm saying it's worth somebody a lot smarter than me looking at real close," Denny said. "Give me till tomorrow. I've got a buddy who used to run that county clerk's office, retired now, owes me a favor from a fishing trip gone wrong. I'll get him on the phone tonight." Sophia thanked him, hung up, and turned to find Ryan standing very still, staring at nothing in particular, the way a man stares when he's trying not to let himself feel something before it's confirmed real. "Don't," she said gently. "Not yet. Hope's expensive out here. Spend it careful." "That sounds like something you learned the hard way." "Everything I know I learned the hard way," Sophia said, and for a second, something old and tired moved behind her eyes before she blinked it away and got back to work. The rest of Saturday folded into itself in pieces. Marcus on the phone with a record specialist in Sacramento, Sophia, pacing the length of the hangar with her laptop, balanced on a stack of oil-stained crates, because it was the only flat surface not covered in tools. Walt quietly bringing out a second folding chair, without being asked, because he'd apparently decided this fight was as much his as anybody's. Lucas drifted in and out, curious, subdued, asking once if the helicopter lady was staying for dinner, which made Ryan laugh for the first time all day, even though nothing about the day had earned it. "She might," Ryan told him. "We'll see." She did stay in the end, not because anyone invited her exactly, but because at 6 o'clock Ryan found himself making enough spaghetti for 4, without entirely deciding to, and Sophia didn't argue when he set a plate down in front of her. Lucas studied her across the table with the particular seriousness of a 7-year-old conducting an investigation of his own. "Are you going to help my dad win?" he asked point blank, the way only kids ask the questions adults spend hours dancing around. Sophia set her fork down and looked at him with an honesty Ryan hadn't expected. "I'm going to try very hard," she said. "I can't promise you it works, but I can promise you I'm not going to stop trying until Friday's over one way or another." Lucas considered that answer with the gravity of a judge weighing evidence, then nodded once, apparently satisfied, and went back to his spaghetti. Ryan caught Sophia's eye across the table and saw something there that looked almost like gratitude for the boy's bluntness, like it was easier to be honest with a 7-year-old than it had been with anyone in a boardroom in years. Sunday came in gray and low clouds, pressing down over the tree line, and with it came the harder part of the fight, the part that didn't involve legal filings at all. "I want to call the Hendersons," Sophia said, first thing, coffee still in hand. "If there's a pattern, we need it on record. And I think you should be the one to make the call, Ryan. Family to family carries more weight than my firm's name on a letterhead." Ryan didn't love the idea of dragging strangers into his mess, but he understood the logic, and by 9 that morning he had Del Henderson on the phone. A voice that sounded older than Ryan remembered a man 2 years his senior having any right to sound. "Bennett," Del said once Ryan explained who he was and why he was calling. "Man, I wondered when he'd come for you next. Figured you'd be too small a fish for him to bother, no offense." "None taken. What happened to you?" "Del Walt told me pieces, but I want to hear it from you." There was a long pause, the kind that told Ryan the man on the other end was steeling himself for something he didn't enjoy revisiting. "Old lean, same as you probably," Del said finally. "Farm equipment financing from my grandfather's day. Sullivan's people showed up polite, as Church told us there was a filing nobody'd cleared, offered us a number, gave us a deadline. We had a lawyer, decent enough fella, but not the kind of firepower you've apparently got now. Fought for about 10 weeks. Sullivan's team buried us in filings we couldn't afford to answer fast enough. By week 11, we were choosing between the fight and keeping the lights on. We chose the lights." His voice cracked slightly on the last part. "Sold for 1/3 of value. Moved to Tennessee. I still can't drive past a warehouse without my stomach turning, and that farm's under one now. Whole thing paved over. My grandfather's barn's a loading dock. Ryan closed his eyes for a second, feeling the shape of his own possible future in another man's already lived past. Would you be willing to put that in writing? Sophia asked, leaning toward the phone. Sworn statement. It could matter both legally and publicly. Another pause, shorter this time. You fighting him for real, not just posturing? For real, Ryan said. Then yeah. Dell said, something steadying in his voice now, something that sounded almost like relief at finally being asked. Yeah, I'll write it down. Every bit of it. Somebody should have stopped that man years ago. Might as well be me that helps. By noon, Sophia had 3 more names from Dell. Other landowners across 2 counties who'd folded under the same playbook, scattered now, some still bitter enough to talk, one too frightened of retaliation, to say more than a few careful sentences before hanging up. It was enough. Marcus compiled it into a document that grew heavier with every call. Evidence of a pattern too consistent to be coincidence, and somewhere in the middle of that grim inventory, Sophia's phone rang with a name that made her sit up straighter. That's my reporter, she said, answering fast. Priya. Hey, I need a favor, and I need it to move fast. Ryan listened to half a conversation he didn't fully understand. Words like pattern of predatory land acquisition, and sworn statements, and before Friday, and felt for the first time since the black truck had torn up his driveway like the ground under him had stopped tilting quite so hard. Then, at just past 2 that afternoon, everything tilted again. Denny called, and this time his voice had none of the cautious hope from the night before. It had something worse in it. Fear. Ryan, he said, I need you to listen to me very carefully, and I need you to stay calm. You're scaring me, Denny. I went to see my buddy this morning. Retired clerk, the one who knew Carol Higgins. Man opens his door, and before I even get a word out, he tells me he's got nothing to say to me, tells me to lose his number, shuts the door in my face. Man I've known 30 years, wouldn't even look me in the eye. Ryan's stomach dropped. Sullivan got to him. Somebody got to him, Denny said. And here's the part that's really got me worried. I stopped by the county archive on my way back, wanted to pull a certified copy of that 2009 filing, just to be safe. Have it locked down before anybody could touch it. He paused, and the pause stretched long enough that Ryan's hand tightened around the phone. The file's gone, Ryan. Not missing. Gone. Checked out 3 days ago under a records request never returned. Clerk on duty couldn't tell me who pulled it. Said the request came through with proper authorization, but the sign-out log's got a name on it that doesn't match anybody who works for the county or for us. The kitchen went very quiet. Sophia had gone still. Phone lowered, listening, with an expression that had shifted from concern into something harder, colder. They took the evidence, Ryan said slowly, before we even knew we needed it. Looks that way, Denny said. Which either means somebody's covering something up, or somebody's just making sure nobody can prove it either way before Friday. Either way, son, we've got a problem a lot bigger than I thought we did an hour ago. Sophia was already moving, already dialing voice. Dropping into the flat-controlled register Ryan was starting to recognize as the sound of her about to go to war. Marcus, get Priya on a 3-way with Denny right now. If county records are disappearing 3 days before a forced deadline, that's not just a real estate story anymore. That's a story about corruption, and reporters chase those a lot faster than land disputes. On it. Ryan sat down heavily at his own kitchen table, head in his hands for a second, feeling the weight of everything pressing down at once. His father's silence, his grandfather's handshake, deal a missing file, a bought-off clerk, a countdown that had just gotten a lot harder to win. Through the window, he could see Lucas out in the yard, throwing a tennis ball for the neighbor's dog that wandered over most Sundays, laughing at something blissfully unaware that 3 counties away, a piece of paper that could determine his entire childhood had just vanished into thin air. Hey! Sophia's hand landed on his shoulder, light, brief, more solid than he expected. We're not done. Missing evidence is its own kind of evidence if you know how to use it right. How do we prove somebody took it? "We don't have to prove who," Sophia said. "We just have to make it very, very inconvenient for Sullivan to explain why a file that supports his entire claim happened to disappear right before we went looking for it." Juries hate convenient disappearances. So do reporters. So does the general public, for that matter. And by Tuesday morning, if Priya's as good as I think she is, the general public is going to have opinions about Grant Sullivan, whether he likes it or not. Monday arrived with its own fresh weight. Ryan woke before his alarm the way he always did when something heavy was sitting on his chest, even in sleep, and found a text from Sophia already waiting, sent at 5:40 that morning. Filed a motion for expedited discovery. Judge Alvarez granted an emergency hearing for Wednesday. Sullivan's team just got served. Call me when you're up. He called her before he'd even made coffee. Emergency hearing, he said. That's fast. Fastest I could get, Sophia said, sounding like she hadn't slept much either. Judge Alvarez doesn't love shady discovery requests and disappearing county files. I laid it out plain in the filing pattern of predatory acquisition across multiple properties. A missing public record checked out under a fraudulent authorization, and a client facing an artificial Friday deadline designed to force a decision before due process could run its course. She granted the hearing within 2 hours of the filing hitting her clerk's desk. That doesn't happen unless a judge is already annoyed. What happens Wednesday? We ask her to freeze the Friday deadline until the missing file question gets resolved. If she grants it, Sullivan's whole strategy falls apart because his entire play depends on you folding before anybody official has time to look closely. For the first time in 3 days, Ryan let himself feel something dangerously close to optimism right up until 11 that morning, when a white sedan with county plates rolled slowly up the gravel drive and parked in almost the exact spot Sullivan's truck had torn up on Saturday. A man in a windbreaker stepped out, folder in hand, expression carefully neutral in the way of someone who'd delivered bad news for a living, long enough to have a face built for it. "Mr. Bennett, Aaron Dietz County Roads Department. I need to talk to you about the Route 9 access easement serving this property." Ryan felt his whole body go tight. "What about it?" "There's been a complaint filed regarding maintenance obligations on the easement portion that crosses the adjacent parcel," Dietz said, glancing down at his folder, like the words there might rearrange themselves into something less unpleasant. "The complainant is requesting the county review whether the easement remains valid given what they're characterizing as decades of neglected upkeep on your end. Pending that review, we may need to restrict commercial vehicle access, fuel trucks, that kind of thing, until it's resolved." "You're telling me somebody's trying to cut off my fuel deliveries?" "I'm telling you there's a complaint," Dietz said carefully, "and the county has to review it. I don't make the rules on who files what, Mr. Bennett. I just have to follow up." "Let me guess who filed it," Ryan said, voice flat. Dietz didn't answer that which was answer enough. He left a copy of the complaint, offered an apologetic sort of nod that didn't cost him anything, and drove off the same way he'd come, leaving Ryan standing in the driveway, holding a fresh piece of paper that represented one more way his whole life could quietly strangle before Friday even arrived. By the time Sophia got the news, her voice on the phone had gone past anger into something colder and more focused. "He's not just trying to force a sale anymore," she said. "He's trying to choke the business out from under you piece by piece, so there's nothing left to fight for, even if we win the legal argument. Fuel Access County Records a bought-off clerk. This isn't a real estate deal, Ryan. This is a siege." "So what do? "We go faster than he does," Sophia said. "Priya's piece runs tomorrow morning. Denny's got sworn statements from 4 separate families by end of day, and I am not letting some easement complaint filed 48 hours before a hearing stop a fuel truck from reaching your property. I'll have our own trucks running fuel out there myself if it comes to that." Ryan almost laughed at the image of Sophia Reynolds in coveralls, hauling avgas, and for a second, in the middle of everything falling apart, something in his chest loosened just slightly at the absurd, fierce loyalty of the offer. That evening, Lucas found him out by the hangar, sitting on an overturned crate, staring at nothing, and climbed up next to him without a word. small shoulder pressed against his father's arm, the way he used to when he was smaller and scared of thunder. "You're worried," Lucas said. "Not a question." "A little." "Is it because of the man in the truck?" "Part of it." Lucas was quiet for a moment, swinging his feet, working something over in his head, with the seriousness only kids bring to questions adults spend years avoiding. "Grandpa built this place right from nothing." "That's right." "Then even if the bad stuff happens," Lucas said slowly, like he was working it out as he spoke, "we'd still have built it. Nobody can take that part right, the building part." Ryan looked down at his son throat tight and pulled him in close. "No," he said quietly. "Nobody can ever take that part. You're exactly right." He didn't tell Lucas about the missing file, or the frozen fuel access, or the emergency hearing 48 hours out that could decide everything. He just held on to his son a little longer than usual, watching the sun go down orange and heavy over the tree line, and let himself believe for a few minutes at least that the building part really was the part that mattered most. Tuesday brought Priya's article splashed across the regional outlet site by 7 that morning, a careful damning piece built entirely out of sworn statements, public filings, and a pointed question about a county record that had vanished 3 days before a forced deadline. By 9, it had been picked up by 2 larger outlets. By 11, Marcus reported that Sullivan's office phone had reportedly been ringing off the hook, with reporters his PR team clearly hadn't been braced for. "He's rattled," Marcus said, reading updates off his phone as they came in. "One of the sources at his office says he's been in back-to-back calls since 8 a.m. Somebody described him as, quote, not handling the attention well. It should have felt like winning. For about 4 hours, it almost did. Then at 2:15 that afternoon, Ryan's phone rang with Denny's name on the screen, and the old man's voice, when it came through, had none of the fight left in it that it carried the day before. "Ryan," Denny said, and something about the careful, hollowed-out way he said the name made every hair on the back of Ryan's neck stand up. "I need you to hear something before you hear it anywhere else. And I need you to know I did not want to be the one telling you this." "Denny, what happened?" "I got a call this morning," Denny said, "from my malpractice carrier. Somebody's filed a bar complaint against me, alleging I mishandled your father's estate 15 years ago, that I concealed knowledge of the lien back then, that I've got a conflict of interest representing you. Now that makes everything I've filed this week compromised." His voice cracked just slightly. 31 years of steady practice showing a hairline fracture for the first time. "It's garbage, Ryan. Every word of it. But the state bar has to investigate regardless. And until they clear me, there's a real chance I get pulled off your case 3 days before that hearing." The porch light of hope that had been burning steady since Sunday guttered hard, threatening to go out completely, and for a long moment Ryan couldn't find a single word to say. For a long moment, Ryan couldn't find a single word to say. Then something in him that had been bending all week finally refused to bend any further. "No," he said, and his voice came out steadier than he felt. "No, Denny, listen to me. You've spent 31 years building a reputation in that county, and Sullivan's trying to burn it down in a week because he's scared. That's not weakness on your part. That's proof we're close to something he can't afford us finding. Ryan, I appreciate the sentiment, but if the bar pulls my license pending investigation, I legally can't stand in front of Judge Alvarez on Wednesday. It's not about reputation. It's about whether I'm allowed in the room." Sophia had gone very still. Phone pressed to her ear, jaw tight, and when she spoke, her voice carried none of the panic Ryan felt clawing up his own throat. "Denny, this is Sophia. You don't need to be in the room. My firm's litigation team can appear alongside local counsel, and I already have someone in mind. But I need everything you've got, every note, every filing, every conversation with that retired clerk sent to me within the hour. If they're moving to sideline you, that means you're close enough to something that scares them. And I am not letting a bar complaint filed in the middle of a documented campaign of intimidation stop this hearing from happening." There was a pause on the line, and when Denny spoke again, some of the old gravel had come back into his voice. "You always talk like this, like a woman driving a truck through a wall." "Only when the wall deserves it," Sophia said. Denny actually laughed short and surprised the first real sound of relief Ryan had heard from him in 20 minutes. "Send me your firm's info. I'll get everything over tonight. And Ryan." His voice softened. "Whatever happens with my license, this fight doesn't stop because of me. You hear that?" "I hear it," Ryan said, throat tight. He hung up and stood there in his kitchen for a long moment, staring at the phone like it might ring again with worse news if he watched it long enough. Outside, the evening light had gone thin and gray. The kind of Tuesday dusk that made a man feel every hour of a week that had somehow lasted a year. "You okay?" Sophia asked. "I don't know anymore what okay even means this week," Ryan said. And for the first time since Saturday morning, something in his voice cracked open just slightly, just enough to let a little of the exhaustion through. "Every time we get a step ahead, he finds a way to knock us back too. A missing file, a frozen easement. Now a bar complaint against a 70-year-old man who's done nothing but try to help me. How many more directions can one guy come at us from before something actually sticks?" "As many as it takes," Sophia said. "That's what men like Sullivan count on, that eventually you get tired enough to just let the next hit land without fighting it. That's the whole strategy. Not winning any one fight outright. Wearing you down until you do his job for him." She stepped closer, and there was nothing performative left in her voice at all, just plain hard-won conviction. "I'm not tired yet, Ryan. And I don't plan on getting there before Friday." He looked at her for a long moment. This woman who 3 days ago had been a stranger, laughing at his father's helicopter, now standing in his kitchen at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night, fighting a war that had never once been hers to fight, and something loosened in his chest that had been wound tight since the black truck first tore up his driveway. "Why do you care this much?" he said quietly. "Really. Not the version about your father. The real answer." Sophia was quiet for a second, like she was deciding how much of herself to hand over. "Because somewhere in the last 4 days," she said, "I stopped seeing a real estate deal and started seeing my father's face every time I look at yours. And I promised myself a long time ago that if I ever got the chance to be the person who showed up for someone the way nobody showed up for him, I'd take it, no matter what it cost." Neither of them said anything for a moment after that. Outside, through the window, Lucas's silhouette crossed the yard, chasing the last of the daylight with the neighbor's dog, blissfully unaware of how much was riding on the next 48 hours. Ryan found him out there 20 minutes later, breathless from running, cheeks flushed, and something about the simple, uncomplicated joy on his son's face steadied him more than any legal strategy had all week. "You look tired, Dad," Lucas said, catching his breath. "I am tired, bud." "Are we gonna be okay?" Ryan crouched down the same way he had on Saturday, the same promise rising up in him, even though the ground under it felt shakier than it had 4 days ago. "I don't know everything that's going to happen," he said honestly, because his son deserved honesty, even when it was hard. "But I know this. Whatever happens Wednesday, whatever happens Friday, you and me, this family, what your grandfather built, that part doesn't go anywhere. I promise you that." Lucas nodded, apparently satisfied with an answer that would have terrified most adults, and ran back off toward the dog, and Ryan stood there in the last of the light, feeling something in his spine straighten that had been bowed under the weight of the week. Wednesday morning came early and cold. Ryan put on the one suit he owned, bought for his father's funeral 6 years ago, still fitting almost exactly the same, which felt like its own kind of quiet omen, and drove to the county courthouse with Sophia and Marcus following in a second car. Denny riding along despite everything, unwilling to miss the hearing, even if he couldn't formally argue it. The courtroom was smaller than Ryan expected, wood-paneled, half-empty, except for a scattering of local faces. He recognized Walt had come uninvited and unasked, sitting stiff and proud in a back row in a collared shirt Ryan had never once seen him wear. Del Henderson had driven up from Tennessee overnight, sitting 2 rows in front of Walt, jaw set like a man who'd waited 2 years for a chance he never thought he'd get. Grant Sullivan sat at the opposing table in a suit that fit too well, flanked by 2 attorneys who looked like they'd never lost a case they cared enough to remember losing. He caught Ryan's eye, once gave a small, unbothered nod. the nod of a man who still believed on some level that this was theater and not a real threat to anything he cared about. Judge Alvarez took the bench at 9 sharp-eyed. Unhurried, the kind of judge who'd clearly heard every trick in the book and stopped being impressed by any of them years ago. This is an emergency hearing on a motion for expedited discovery and temporary restraining order, she said, flipping through the filing. Ms. Reynolds's firm alleges a pattern of predatory land acquisition, a fraudulently obtained forced deadline. And this is the part that got my attention. A public county record that disappeared 3 days before that deadline under what your filing calls suspicious circumstances. Mr. Sullivan's counsel, I assume you'd characterize that differently. Sullivan's lead attorney. A tall man named Whitfield, with the calm, bored confidence of someone paid too much to ever sound rattled, rose smoothly. Your Honor, my client has held a valid, properly renewed lien on this property since 2009. Any suggestion of impropriety is speculation dressed up as urgency by opposing counsel to manufacture a crisis where none exists. The missing file is a clerical matter, unfortunate, but hardly evidence of a conspiracy. Convenient clerical matter, Sophia's lead litigator said, rising a sharp, compact woman named Renata Cruz, who Ryan had met for the first time 20 minutes ago in the courthouse hallway and already trusted more than he expected to. Your Honor, we have sworn statements from 4 separate property owners across 2 counties describing an identical pattern. A dormant lien, a sudden renewed interest, a friendly visit, and a Friday deadline. We have a notary, Carol Higgins, whose signature appears on the 2009 renewal, despite public records showing she retired from that office in 2006. And we have a public file that vanished from county archive custody under a sign-out authorization that does not match any employee of the county or of my client. Speculation, Whitfield said again, though something in his composure had thinned a degree. Then Your Honor won't mind, Renata said, if I call Ms. Higgins herself. She's outside in the hallway right now. The room went very still. Sullivan's face didn't move, not exactly, but something behind his eyes flickered, and Ryan, watching close, saw the first real crack in the man's armor since the black truck had rolled up his driveway 5 days ago. Your Honor, Whitfield said, standing fast now, all his earlier calm gone thin. This witness wasn't on any pre-hearing disclosure. She wasn't locatable until 11 o'clock last night, Renata said. We've been trying to find her since Sunday. County records had her listed at an old address. My investigator finally tracked her to her daughter's house 2 towns over. Judge Alvarez studied both attorneys for a long moment, then nodded once, sharp and final. I'll allow it. This is an emergency proceeding, counselor, and I'd rather hear directly from the source than argue about procedure while a family's livelihood hangs in the balance. Bring her in. Carol Higgins was a small woman in her 70s, silver-haired hands trembling slightly as she took the stand. The trembling less from age, Ryan suspected, than from nerves. Renata approached her gently, the way you'd approach someone you needed steady more than scared. Mrs. Higgins, can you confirm when you retired from your position as a licensed notary in this county? 2006, she said, voice small but clear. March of 2006. And can you look at this document? Renata held up a copy of the 2009 lien renewal and tell the court whether this is your signature and notary seal. Carol Higgins studied the page for a long moment, and when she looked up, something in her face had gone pale and tight. It looks like my signature, she said slowly. But I didn't sign it. I couldn't have. My commission had expired 3 years before that date, and I've never once in my life notarized a document after my commission lapsed. I know that signature better than my own reflection. Somebody traced it. Objection, Whitfield said, though it came out weaker than the word usually should. This witness cannot possibly. Overruled. Judge Alvarez said, not even looking up. She just told this court someone forged her legal signature on a document used to enforce a claim against this man's property. Sit down, counselor. Whitfield sat. Ryan felt something in his chest that he hadn't let himself feel all week. Not quite relief, not yet, but the first thin, trembling edge of it, like watching a storm break just slightly on the horizon, after days of pressure building. Mrs. Higgins, Renata continued gentler now. Has anyone approached you recently about this document? Before today. Carol Higgins hesitated, glanced once quick and afraid toward the defense table, and then seemed to decide something. A man came to my daughter's house Sunday, she said, well-dressed, said he was doing research for a real estate matter, asked if I remembered notarizing documents for a company back in the 2000s. I told him I didn't remember specifics. He left an envelope, $2,000 cash and a note asking me to keep the conversation between us. Her chin lifted slightly. I didn't spend it. It's still in the envelope. I brought it if the court wants it. The courtroom had gone completely silent, the kind of silence that has weight to it. And Ryan turned just slightly to see Grant Sullivan sitting very still at the defense table, staring straight ahead, jaw locked, the easy, unbothered confidence from 20 minutes ago gone completely out of him. Your Honor, Renata said into the silence, we'd ask the court to enter that envelope into evidence, and we'd renew our motion for a temporary restraining order, freezing enforcement of this lien pending a full investigation into apparent forgery and witness tampering. Judge Alvarez took her time flipping back through the filing, glancing once hard and unreadable toward the defense table. Granted, she said finally. The Friday deadline referenced in these filings is stayed indefinitely pending investigation. I'm also referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for review of possible forgery and witness tampering charges. She looked directly at Sullivan for the first time. Mr. Sullivan, I'd strongly advise you retain separate criminal counsel before this goes any further. The gavel came down sharp and final, and the sound of it seemed to echo longer than it should have. Ryan sat frozen for a second, half convinced he'd misheard, until Sophia's hand closed around his arm, gripping hard, and Renata turned around with something that wasn't quite a smile, but was close enough to count. That's it, Sophia said, voice unsteady in a way Ryan hadn't heard from her all week. Ryan, that's it. The deadline's gone. He's done. Behind them, Walt had risen halfway out of his seat, fist raised in a silent, fierce little gesture of victory, and Del Henderson had his face in his hands, shoulders shaking slightly. 2 years of quiet grief finally finding somewhere to go. Sullivan didn't look at any of them on his way out. He walked fast, flanked by his attorney's phone already out, and Ryan caught just enough of his expression in passing to see something he hadn't expected to see on that face all week, real, uncomplicated fear. Outside on the courthouse steps in the thin gray light of a Wednesday morning that had started with dread and ended somewhere Ryan didn't have a word for. Yet Denny Okafor was waiting, having watched the whole thing from the gallery, unable to argue a single word of it, tears standing openly in his eyes. I heard, he said before Ryan could say anything. Whole hallway heard. Ryan, son, I don't know how to. You did plenty, Ryan said, pulling the old man into a hug that surprised them both. You found the thread. Everybody else just pulled it. By that afternoon, the bar complaint against Denny had been quietly withdrawn. The complainant, it turned out, untraceable to anyone but a P.O. box that Marcus digging with the particular fury of a man who'd spent all week being underestimated by everyone in this story, traced within 2 hours to a shell company registered at the same address as one of Sullivan's holding companies. Priya had the follow-up story filed by 6 that evening, and by the time it ran the next morning, 2 more names had come forward. Families Ryan had never heard of from counties further out, each one recognizing the same pattern in their own history the moment they read about Carol Higgins and her untouched envelope of cash. By Thursday, the county roads department called Ryan directly apologetic to inform him the easement complaint had been withdrawn and full fuel access was restored. Effective immediately, no further review required. By Friday, the day that had loomed over the entire week like a blade, there was no deadline left to meet at all. Sullivan's attorneys filed to withdraw from all pending matters related to Bennett Field. The lien, still technically on record, was now the subject of a criminal referral that made it radioactive to touch, and Renata Cruz assured Ryan that Sophia's firm's civil team would have it formally voided within the month. It should have felt like enough. For most of Friday, it almost did. Then, late that afternoon, sitting in the hangar office, going through a week's worth of neglected paperwork with Sophia across the desk from him, Ryan found himself asking the question that had been sitting quiet in the back of his mind since Wednesday. "What happens now?" he said. "With the deal, the logistics hub, the acquisition, all of it. I assume that's still on the table now that the mess is cleared up." Sophia set down the folder she'd been reading and looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Honestly, I don't know if it should be. Not the way it was originally pitched." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I came out here a week ago planning to tear most of this place down," she said. "Extend the runway, rebuild the hangars from scratch, replace everything that made this place what it is with something more efficient. And somewhere in the middle of watching you fight for every inch of it, I realized I'd be finishing the exact thing Sullivan tried to do, just with better paperwork and a nicer smile." She leaned forward. "So here's a different idea. What if Reynolds Aerospace doesn't buy this field at all? What if we invest in it instead? Fund the expansion you actually want, a second hangar, updated fuel infrastructure, maybe a proper maintenance training program using your logs as the model. Since apparently they're better than anything the FAA's ever handed me, and you stay exactly what you are, owner, not employee, not seller, partner." Ryan sat with that for a long moment, turning it over, looking for the catch out of 6 years of hard-earned habit and not finding one. "Why?" he said finally. "You could still buy this place outright if you wanted. Cheaper probably now that Sullivan's out of the picture and I've got no leverage left to negotiate with." "Because this place was never really about the land," Sophia said. "It's about what you built on it and what your father built before you, and I've spent 1 week watching what that's worth up close. I don't want to own that, Ryan. I want to help it grow into whatever it's supposed to become next. There's a difference, and it took me getting laughed at by my own board twice this week over the phone to finally understand it." Ryan looked at her for a long moment. This woman who'd stepped off a helicopter 8 days ago and mocked his father's legacy without a second thought, now sitting across from him offering to help build it into something bigger instead of tearing it down, and felt something settle in his chest that had nothing left in it resembling suspicion at all. "Lucas is going to want it in writing that he still gets to keep Rex for show and tell," Ryan said, and Sophia actually laughed, surprised and real, the first unguarded sound he'd heard out of her all week. "I'll have Marcus draft a clause." The following month moved fast in the particular way that recovery does after a long fight. Paperwork signed, construction crews breaking ground on a second hangar, built to match the bones of the original instead of replacing it. Denny fully cleared and back to handling the field's legal affairs, with a spring in his step Ryan hadn't seen in years. Del Henderson called twice more once to say his own case against Sullivan's estate was moving forward, thanks to the district attorney's now sprawling investigation, and once just to say thank you. Voice thick for a fight he hadn't been able to win himself 2 years earlier. Grant Sullivan's name showed up in the news 3 more times over the following weeks. An indictment, a second, a plea deal reportedly in negotiation. 4 more victims identified by investigators working off the trail. Priya's reporting had cracked open. Ryan found he didn't feel much satisfaction reading any of it. Mostly, he just felt tired in a way that was finally blessedly starting to lift. On a bright Saturday, 6 weeks after a helicopter first landed on his runway, and a woman in a gray suit laughed at his father's old Bell 206. Ryan stood in the hangar doorway, watching that same helicopter fully restored. Now every panel back in place, engine humming, clean and steady for the first time in years. Lift off the ground under its own power, with Ryan at the controls, and Lucas strapped in tight beside him, grinning wide enough to split his face in two. Sophia watched from the tarmac below Marcus beside her Walt, leaning against the hangar with his arms crossed, and something suspiciously close to pride on his weathered face. And as the old machine climbed steady into a clear afternoon sky, carrying a father's legacy and a son's future, in the same worn frame, Ryan understood finally and completely the thing his own father had spent a lifetime trying to teach him, without ever quite saying it out loud. Some men built empires out of other people's land. Other men built something that couldn't be taken at all. Not by lawyers, not by lies, Not by anyone circling with a checkbook and a deadline because it was never made of paper in the first place. It was made of grease-stained hands and early mornings, and a promise kept to a 7-year-old boy on the worst Saturday of his life, and no forged signature in any county archive in America was ever going to be strong enough to touch it. Ryan Bennett had been underestimated his entire life. He had been called ordinary, overlooked, dismissed as nothing more than the help standing beside his own inheritance. And in the end, it hadn't mattered because the men who tried to take his life apart had made the same mistake every single time. They looked at the grease on his hands and thought they were looking at all he was. They never once thought to look at what he'd already built.